Ever wanted to go to Hawaii but could never afford to, sing your heart out to karaoke without ever actually singing it, or play wingman to the blossoming of a crustacean romance? This game is for you. Actually, this entire series is for you. The Yakuza or Like a Dragon series, as it's now officially called, is a series like none other. You've probably heard about it one way or another, and seen clips out of context making you wonder, what exactly even is this series? And honestly, ask anyone who's played them, and they won't really know how to answer that. At least not in words that would do it justice. It's more of one of those things that you just have to experience yourself. If you haven't played any Like a Dragon game before, I'd strongly recommend you play all the mainline entries, plus Gaiden, before picking up Infinite Wealth, because while you don't technically have to, like most long-running franchises with interconnected storylines, you won't be able to fully appreciate the characters and ongoing arcs without it. Because this series is heavily character-oriented, and some of the best moments revolve around returning characters. But I understand that this is the 9th in the main series, and it's a massive time commitment. So, my next recommendation is to play some of them and watch cutscenes or something for the others. But if not even that, at the very least, I'd recommend playing Yakuza Like a Dragon, as it introduces us to Ichiban, many of the other new characters, the new combat system, and lays the groundwork for this one. Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, as that gives us insight as to what Kiryu has been up to during these events, and then Infinite Wealth. And maybe watch a recap for the previous games. Also, if money is a concern, these games go on sale quite often. In fact, Sega is hosting a Year of the Dragon sale on Steam right now. But if you want to save a little extra, they're also available on Game Pass, apart from Infinite Wealth of course. But the bottom line is, the Like a Dragon series is serious and heartwarming, goofy and silly, fun, and just everything in between. The series is truly something special, and there's nothing quite like it. And Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is its most ambitious entry to date. The biggest problem people had with Yakuza Like a Dragon, or as I'll be referring to it from now on as 7, was that 1, it introduced a whole new combat system that turned people off, and 2, the grind, especially towards the end of the game. Now, that's not to say that the game is bad or these are inherently bad problems, but they do definitely deter some people. It might vary in degrees depending on how invested they are in the series, but for all intents and purposes, this is what threw people for a loop. So if you enjoyed everything that 7 had to offer, you'll definitely love this one, because gameplay-wise, it's a complete package from start to finish. But if you aren't quite a fan of 7, it's possible you could overlook this, but chances are you probably won't be able to because all of that returns here in Infinite Wealth, albeit slightly better. Now in my experience, I like turn-based combat, but I don't love it. I dabble in those types of games here and there, but I rarely finish them. Here, however, I really enjoyed it and I felt that the combat had definitely been improved and refined significantly, even as someone who prefers the brawler style in the other games. One thing I particularly appreciated was how your party members had more room in this one. From what I recall, in the last one, your attack may be blocked by another enemy standing in front, whereas here, you can actually move up and attack any enemy you see fit, making your next plan of attack much smoother. Still having trouble though? Well, call a pound mate, because for a certain cost, you can call on additional support to help you through a tough spot. The caveat is, like a lot of things, it can be quite expensive at first, so use it sparingly. But you don't just have to rely on your skills though. Aside from obviously equipping the right gear, your weapons can be upgraded at Julie's Gearworks. It's there where you can spend the money and the materials you find to upgrade them or craft new ones entirely. When a weapon reaches a certain level, you can unlock brands that provide an extra boost for varying attack types, like increasing the success rate of paralysis. While most characters play similarly in this type of combat, Kiryu plays a little differently. In addition to the movesets that each one of the other characters have, Kiryu can also switch between styles like he did in the older games. He can switch between Brawler, Rush, and Beast. If you're playing on controller, it is the top 3 directional buttons. Beyond this, after reaching a certain point, Kiryu can actually temporarily break through the turn-based combat with a move called Dragon's Resurgence. Holding down R2 or the right trigger activates the beat-em-up style combat during that small window, and using it can make for a devastating blow towards any foe. Like in 7, there are jobs. Jobs are essentially your classes. And if you want to unlock new jobs, you can by visiting Alo Happy and paying the fee to go on one of the tours. But personally, I found it to not be very worth it because it is pretty costly at the start, since you don't earn very much. And later on, when you probably can afford it, you already likely invested all your stats into your current job. But if you do plan on trying it out and leveling all of the different jobs, then the bonus here is that you'll be able to carry over a number of moves from other jobs into the one you've equipped. And those different movesets can make each one of your party members incredibly versatile for each enemy type that you encounter. And there are a lot of enemy types in this game. One of the biggest highlights Infinite Wealth has to offer are its drinklings. Throughout the course of the game, you'll come across these pink markers scattered across the map where you and one of the party members have a conversation. Each one you do fills up this bond bingo card, and every time you get a bingo, you can return to either Survive or Revolve Bar to start up a drink link. It's in these interactions where you build bonds and learn about each one of your party members, and some of the best and most heartfelt storytelling is done here. This isn't just present for the sake of the story though. Building these bonds allows for additional team-up attacks, making each turn more potent. Drink links and bingo cards aren't the only way to build bonds, however. While they typically will fill up each meter quicker, purchasing gifts or engaging in combat encounters will grant small boosts. You can also build on these links with your party by visiting restaurants and ordering combo dishes. Doing so triggers a small scene with your party chatting while enjoying their meal. The social links don't end with your party, by the way. Early in the game, you are given an app called Aloha Links that allows you to friend people you greet on the street, like Carter, who's only comfortable using the toilet at home, so that he does his best to avoid lengthy excursions. Each time you do that, their meter fills up too, and eventually you go from strangers to not only friends, but buddies. Some of these, however, aren't just humans either. You can feed animals you come across to achieve the same thing. It's all very wholesome stuff. Now, it may seem like there's really no purpose to this beyond just that, but every time you make a friend, it locks it into the app, and each time you become buddies, you receive an item of some kind, whether that be a stat buff, a new weapon, or new gear. Also, those cute little animals will also hand you an item if you've become buddies with them too. One of the mini games I really loved and found hilarious were the Mismatch ones. Mismatch is a dating app that Ichiban joins in the pursuit of love. Well, it's more about building his personality than anything. After curating his profile to meet certain matches, you begin chatting with them, starting with basic questions, then things relating to your profile, if you can remember it, an emoji sticker, and finally sealing the deal by spamming messages. Each one of these fills up a meter, and the higher it fills, obviously, the higher the success. This whole minigame is a lot like the cabaret minigames in the past, but I suppose now more modern. You can also take proficiency exams that can boost your personality score, which, as you know, grant bonuses in combat. Though again, like a lot of things, it costs a lot, and it's something you probably won't invest in until later into the game when you acquire more money. Goodbye Pokemon, sayonara Pal World, and hello Sujimon, because who needs those when you've got this? You may remember these guys in 7, where you can complete basically what is an entire Pokedex for them, but now there's more. For those unfamiliar, Sujimon is basically like Pokemon, except instead of trapping little wildlife into a tiny little ball and having them battle each other against their will, you have humans who you don't trap and want to be forced into battle, so I guess that makes it better? I don't know, who cares? It's awesome. So just like in Pokemon, as the trainer, you take turns commanding them to do certain attacks, and just like the rest of the game, you have to play them strategically. I'll be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time actually doing any of the Sujimon battles beyond the required introduction during the main story, but it does seem like a lot of fun if you want to get another dose of Pokemon-like stuff. In order to recruit new Sujimon, you can find them usually after you've battled a random group of enemies, and sometimes when you're victorious, one of them reemerges, waiting to be potentially recruited. You can do this by presenting them with a Suji gift, essentially catching them, if you will. If you succeed with the on-screen prompts, you may convince them. However, sometimes that's not enough and they will reject both you and your present. Contrary to the title, amassing infinite wealth is initially no easy feat either. Aside from pawning off items and equipment, doing jobs like working for Crazy Eats will grant you the cash you seek. Doing different tricks will help you meet those quotas faster, and the better the tricks, the better the bonus. It's actually quite a lot of fun riding around the block delivering food in the most chaotic way. But that's kind of what you expect from these games at this point. Without it, would it even have the same charm? Speaking of Pokemon, the trolleys can give you a nice little tour around the city, but at certain stops, you can start this minigame called Sicko Snap. Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. Just like how Sujimon is like Pokemon, it's like Pokemon Snap, but with sickos. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. If you thought this wasn't enough to be a serious crime drama, just a turn-based RPG, just a dungeon crawler roguelite, just Pokemon, or just Pokemon Snap, this game is part Animal Crossing too. Welcome to Dondoko Island, an island somewhere off the shores of Hawaii where Ichiban has to help its locals rebuild its 5-star resort after hitting rock bottom. And if you know anything about Ichiban, he knows a thing or two about rock bottom. As you help rebuild the resort piece by piece, in true Animal Crossing-like fashion, you also need to help ward off the pirates who have been continuously using this island as their dumping ground. It's those sections that you really need to spend time clearing out. Also, doing your dailies will provide you with extra coin, and while you can spend your Doko bucks on purchasing items at the shop, when you're ready to take the dolphin back home, you can also cash out some of it and convert it into the game's actual currency. This effectively makes Dondoko Island the best place to farm money. But as I was saying, there is an entire story here, and you can really sink a whole bunch of hours into it. You Animal Crossing fans will know, making it essentially a whole other game inside this already gigantic game. It's actually insane how much ambition and thought went into this. It's like the devs had a meeting and threw out a bunch of random ideas and wrote it down on a whiteboard and just did it all. That's what this feels like. Gaining XP in this game is really quite slow. For most of my playtime, I struggled to gain much without starting to feel a bit burnt out after a while. Most of the major XP you'll find will come from the main story quests, as you know. However, the reason to even gain that XP is to level up in order to meet the level requirements for each story chapter. In the early sections of the game, the best way to farm is by wandering the streets of Honolulu or Eijincho and tackling the enemies with red markers above their head. You'll notice as you progress and continue to level up, some of the groups of enemies will have a blue one instead. Ignore these as much as possible as they grant little to none. In fact, the game itself is aware of this, and I'm really glad that they added a way to essentially skip the fight if you do happen to encounter them. Also, doubly thankfully, this time encounters won't happen nearly as often just by themselves. You actively need to seek them out. At least the worthwhile ones. Each one of those groups have detection meters that allow for you to evade them much more easily. In previous games, one of the major gripes was just how often these encounters would trigger, frustrating the player who just wanted to proceed with the main story, but is constantly interrupted with these fights. Luckily here, it's not an issue. Especially with the map feeling much bigger and each road feeling wider and generally more spacious, it gives more room to roam and explore without stressing about whether or not you need to punch your way through. But also, because the map is bigger this time around, I actually found myself taking taxis a whole lot more. Before, I would only use it for main story missions or to travel between cities, but rarely, if ever, did I actually use them to fast travel within the same one, despite all those annoying encounters. But now, as paradoxical as it sounds, even with those encounters reduced, I still find myself using them a lot more. It not only saves time, but it also feels like pocket change in the latter half of the game, depending on how much wealth you amass. You could also use a scooter to get around, but recharging it can get pretty costly, thus I opted to move on foot for most of the game and occasionally ride the trolley, and then use those taxis later on. It's a fun novelty though. In later sections of the game, once you open it up, the best way to farm XP is through the dungeons. That's right, there are roguelike dungeons in this game where you can go through each level, collecting items, fighting enemies, and attempting to rescue a certain number of missing people. As you continue through, you will eventually encounter save points and full recovery before taking on the boss of that dungeon. Each dungeon grants you with not only more XP through all the enemies you face, but new, often higher level gear and equipment as well, depending on when you tackle them. Then once you leave, you can exchange the robodiscs you find for different items like the Sonic soundtrack or blueprints for gold statues of your two favorite Yakuza. As helpful as these dungeons are and as great as the gear can be, these procedurally generated levels eventually start to feel monotonous due to how similar they both look and feel, even with the map's changes. Honestly, at a point I could barely get through it without listening to a podcast or something in the background just to keep me awake and engaged to some degree. This isn't the only way to farm XP, of course. There are items in the game you can equip that will grant a multiplier that increases how much XP you can gain each time. But make sure if you do equip this, you equip this much earlier on, because it debuffs other stats you may already have, and some of those other stats will be more crucial then. Both ankle weights and Yakuza training gear will grant a ton of XP, but the ankle weights greatly reduce MP and the training gear reduces 100 HP. Now, you may be wondering why you gain very little XP in the first place. This is because, in case you've been out of the loop, RGG actually paywalled New Game Plus behind their deluxe and ultimate editions of the game, which I know, it's insane. Paywalling such a basic feature is simply greedy. Moreover, while you can also purchase packs separately, the Ultimate Edition includes special boosters, including level boosters. There are ways to collect it, apparently through random briefcases as you explore, or by visiting certain vendors, or getting enough points in Psychosnap to purchase one. And from my experience, only one. Or if you pre-ordered the game, you got the Heroes Booster Pack that immediately gives you 5 to use on your party. Either way, it almost feels like they're incentivizing you to eventually purchase these packs, and it just doesn't sit right with me. I'm going to avoid discussing any major story spoilers as much as possible, even though some of it made it into the trailers. If you watched it, you know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, I strongly suggest that you go in as blind as possible. As to why they revealed a particular plot point in the trailer is beyond me, but I initially assumed that the surprises would be then much bigger. Because if you're going to drop something as large as that, you'd have to assume that there's something even bigger they're saving, right? Unfortunately, no. There's a good number of things they don't reveal, but most of those major reveals you will figure out well before the plot unfolds, and well before many of the main cast of characters. Still, I guess it's good to have 1 or 2 surprises here and there, even if they are largely predictable. But as far as the story goes as a whole and what they present, honestly, kinda leaves a lot left to be desired. Now, before I get any further into it, I will be discussing minor spoilers outlining the basic setup of the plot and progression of the story. Skip to this timestamp or chapter marker if you'd like to avoid them. The plot, the characters, and all the groundwork that lays the foundation for the plot moving forward is done really smoothly. It may start somewhat slow, but I actually enjoyed this gentle takeoff through its opening chapters. The opening section of the game gives us enough time to catch up with all our favorite characters since the last main entry. We get a look into what they've been up to since then, and it asks the question, what happens to the Yakuza once they've been disbanded? And I think this is a question that is a really interesting one to explore, and like this opening section, feels like the most natural direction to take the series and really build off these implications from then on. A lot of the new characters are done well too, and fit naturally within the series. I like the addition of Chitose and Tomizawa, but the real standout for me was Yamai, one of the antagonists. Can't get into exactly why without spoiling it, but he's definitely a highlight to many. I also liked Dwight too. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear Danny Trejo's performance as I played it in the original Japanese, but this voice actor was pretty good too, and contextually, I think it makes a bit more sense given how most of the main characters know little to no English. It is funny though when other bilingual characters switch between Japanese and English.
What's the holdup? Get this thing open already!
The game starts in 2022, with Ichiban working for an agency called Hello Work, that provides people with different employment opportunities. He specifically has been helping ex-Yakuza try to reintegrate into society as they struggle to find jobs that will employ them given their previous record, and previous associations to those organizations. The 5-year clause makes this especially difficult, and with little opportunities to support themselves, it often forces them to rejoin. This is real, by the way. It actually happens. And because of the promise Ichiban made to Arakawa in Yakuza Like a Dragon, he continues to aid them as much as possible. That comes to a halt a year later when popular VTuber Hisoka Tatara spreads lies about Ichiban recruiting those ex-Yakuza into a crime syndicate of his own, which leads to Ichiban, Nanba, and Adachi all losing their jobs. And especially with all that's been going on lately, that unfortunately has been hitting close to home for many people. Sawashiro then emerges and reveals to Ichiban that Ikane, his biological mother, is still alive and kicking it in Hawaii, and seemingly with nothing to lose, Ichiban sets off to Honolulu to finally reunite with his mother. But of course, things don't completely go to plan. It's this build-up that not only sets the rest of the stage for the game and a trail of intrigue, but also makes everything feel natural and real, despite how unrealistic the series typically is, especially with Ichiban's wild imagination. It even adds a gag that gave me the most secondhand embarrassment since Scott's Tots.
To my guardian angel, and the gift that you gave me.
While embarrassing, this beginning felt like it really understood the characters. I'm not entirely sure the same could have been said about the end. I won't delve into exactly what I mean, but I'll explain how we arrived there. After that initial takeoff, as it approaches the middle sections of the game, the world in the map opens up, and that makes perfect sense. You would expect it like any other Like a Dragon game, or really just any game with any sort of exploration. But it's from this point we start to experience turbulence, because all the way through the latter half of the game, the pacing starts to take a bit of a nosedive that doesn't quite stick the landing. The previous entry, Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, in my opinion, had the best pacing throughout the series. It may have been a much smaller game than the others, but the reason why it quickly became amongst my favorites in the series was because of that. And recently, a lot of people had been realizing that more doesn't necessarily mean better. Infinite Wealth, in contrast, is almost the exact opposite of Gaiden. Instead of it being a brawler, it's a turn-based RPG. Instead of it balancing story and gameplay nicely, it heavily prioritizes gameplay. And instead of it being the shortest in the series, it's the longest. Now, don't get me wrong, Infinite Wealth is not a bad game. Far from it, in fact. But there's no denying that this was much longer than it needed to be. I'm not saying that the side content isn't worth it, nor do I think it should be cut, but what I am saying is that the main story should have been much tighter. Gaiden might not have been the absolute best story, but its emotional payoff was far greater. Part of that was due to the flow of each chapter, and in Infinite Wealth, most of the emotional weight is carried in the sub-stories, and the drink links, and the other side content, not the main story itself. There are moments here and there, but it doesn't really feel like it completely commits to anything, and even in some of the side content, it feels like they dangle keys of nostalgia in your face just to leave you with a gut punch. So because the story is lacking, especially with the expectations that they had set in previous games and their trailers, the gameplay ultimately suffers, albeit being really good. Because the pacing is off and the story often feels unfulfilling, coupled with the slow farming and the repetitive dungeons, it makes large sections of the game feel grindy and unrewarding, particularly in the middle and the end. To give further context, there's a character who ends up joining your party in the penultimate chapter. It's absolutely bizarre that they would add a new party member that late into the game, and I'm not entirely sure if that's the same for everyone else, but they were a whole 5 levels beneath the rest of the party. Because of this, I didn't bother swapping them out for any of the others. Perhaps if they introduced them a few chapters earlier, or made them the same level, or at least closed the gap a bit more, then I'd maybe consider using them. I mean, this character I think might have had some interesting movesets, but I definitely wasn't going to find out. But at the end of the day, it's not a huge deal, it's quite minor actually, but I think it's one of the many examples of the results of this game's pacing. Now again, the story itself isn't bad, but with its length and its setup, it ultimately disappointed me, leaving me wanting more. Oh, so much more. Your playtime for the main story will run you about 65 hours, but the total playtime on my finished save file logged it at 88 hours and 22 minutes with some side content. Personally, I prefer tighter linear narratives like 6 and Gaiden, but depending on who you are, you may differ on this. Because if you absolutely love 7 and herald it as your favorite, chances are you're probably looking for something completely different to what I may look for in an RPG game. While I like having a balance between narrative and gameplay, for certain games like the ones in the series, the narrative should take precedence, and any good narrative-focused game should know how to correctly pace itself. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth unfortunately doesn't do that. There's lots of ideas, and it's definitely an interesting and ambitious game overall, but the story's unwillingness to really commit to anything fails to live up to its predecessors. It's wasted potential. That said, it's not all bad. Many of the game's most shining moments happen in the spaces between, and as I said, it's worth commending RGG for trying to make it bigger and doing something new and polishing the gameplay that they built off of 7. There's a lot of content here, and you'll definitely get your money's worth, that's for sure. But given this length and where they took the story, we can only wonder about the future of Like a Dragon.